Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies for our Civics EOC lessons, where today we will look at documents that influence the colonists, especially the Founding Fathers and the framers of the U.S. Constitution, as we inch closer to the colonies declaring their independence from England. Today we'll look at some of the events, and more importantly, the documents that were produced from these events, mainly from Europe, and what ideals influence the Founding Fathers and the framers or the writers of the U.S. Constitution. Remember, the first Europeans came to what would later become the United States in the early 1600s. And with those Europeans came many new political ideals that would shape the colonists' opinions and the type of government they would eventually want. As you can see from your standard, the documents you need to know are the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, the Mayflower Compact, and Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I just remind our teachers that this PowerPoint with a variety of materials are available by clicking the link below this video. So let's start all the way back in 1215 with the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta resulted from a dispute between King John of England and his nobles, known as barons. In those days, the king gave the barons land in return for their loyalty and to make money for the king and for themselves. King John kept launching wars against France, and the barons had to supply soldiers and money for the king's war efforts. In other words, the barons were being taxed without their consent. The barons combined their armies and forced the king to sign the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. The Magna Carta is credited as the first document to establish the rule of law and limit governmental power. It helped establish that governments, even kings and queens, should be guided by laws and that certain rights should be protected. Beyond the concept of limited government found in this document, your exam will want you to identify how the Magna Carta established due process rights. Now, we were introduced to the concept of due process in our last lesson, and given a simplistic definition that due process is often the rights associated with those accused of a crime or some kind of a civil offense. For example, a due process right that we take for granted nowadays is the right to a jury. The Magna Carta established that the barons would not face punishment except for by the quote-unquote lawful judgment of their peers, which is basically the definition of a jury. And the due process right to a jury is found in the U.S. Constitution Bill of Rights, Amendment number 6. Now don't worry, we will return to all of the U.S. amendments that you need to know for your exam. The Magna Carta also established the concept of no taxation without the consent or permission of the governed, and called for representatives to be consulted by the king. This eventually led to a republic and the creation of Parliament in England, which would ultimately limit the power of the kings and queens. However, future monarchs in England would ignore certain provisions of the Magna Carta, which would lead to a revolution and the establishment of the English Bill of Rights over 400 years later, which we will look at in a minute. So fast forward to 1620, and most of us know the story of the Mayflower, which landed in present-day Massachusetts. We're often taught that the story of the Mayflower is pilgrims sailing to America in search of religious freedom. However, pilgrims or Puritans made up less than half of the voyagers on the Mayflower. And before getting off the boat, the settlers knew they needed a governing body and laws. Thus, the Mayflower Compact was drafted and signed. The document's signers, quote-unquote, agreed to combine themselves into a civil body politic, giving us another must-know concept, self-government. Self-government meant that the colonists would rule themselves. And unlike Europe and England, where the nobility still reigned, this new land would have a government ruled by the people. Now, this was 1620, and the United States would not, quote-unquote, unite until 150 years later. So the tradition of governing by the people or self-government was fully ingrained in the colonists' mind when the United States declared their independence. Now back to the Mayflower Compact, the next concept you need to know is consent of the governed. Now consent means giving your permission for something, and the governed are the people. Thus, the consent of the governed means the government's legitimate source of power comes from the people's agreement to be ruled. This is another concept we will come back to, as the words consent of the governed will be used by Thomas Jefferson when drafting the Declaration of Independence. Speaking of the Founding Fathers, they will also seek inspiration from what was called the Glorious Revolution, which was resolved in England in 1689. Now, we could spend a lot of time discussing this event, but what you need to know is that ultimately Parliament kicked out their king and invited a young heir to assume the throne. However, that young couple, King William and Queen Mary, were forced to agree to a new document, the English Bill of Rights, as Parliament again wanted to limit their power. The English Bill of Rights was a landmark document, and you will be responsible for knowing some of the rights found in it, as well as the limits on royal power, which, as you can see, the young couple was not too thrilled about having to agree to. Some of the provisions from the English Bill of Rights included the denial of cruel punishments, inspiring the U.S. Bill of Rights' 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, or the protection of free speech as outlined in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Additional rights included provisions for life, liberty, and property, another concept we'll look at closer when Thomas Jefferson was drafting the Declaration of Independence. No taxation without representation, one of the battle cries for U.S. independence, as well as due process rights such as the right to a speedy and fair jury trial. So as you can see, the English Bill of Rights was a huge inspiration for the U.S. version, which would be created 100 years later in 1789, the same year George Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States. Speaking of independence, we get our final must-know document. In this case, it's a pamphlet called Common Sense, written by author and political thinker Thomas Paine. In this incredibly popular pamphlet, Paine made the case that it was common sense for the colonists to declare their independence and govern themselves. Paine outlined the case for America to be ruled by a representative self-government, one of those concepts we've been talking about. And this is known as republicanism. Yes, once again, we will be looking closer at republicanism in upcoming lessons. Paine's document helped spur a movement for independence that had already developed throughout the colonies and was released the same year as the Declaration of Independence was signed, kicking off the Revolutionary War and the creation of what would become the United States. And this was where we will pick up next time, but before we do, let's review. These foundational documents influence all the following except the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Signed in 1620, it established the tradition of self-government and the rule of law in the 13 colonies, the Mayflower Compact. Which political concept is about the ideal that the people give their permission to be ruled? Consent of the governed. Which document signed in 1215 AD helped establish the principle of limited government? The Magna Carta. Which document outlined rights and limited the king or queen's powers, leading to a constitutional monarchy? This is the second one, the English Bill of Rights. Which of the following was not a right guaranteed in the English Bill of Rights? The right to privacy. And that is it. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to subscribe. Just reminding teachers that this PowerPoint with lesson plan, worksheet, guided notes, Kahoot, and more are available at Teachers Pay Teachers by clicking the link below this video or search for Mr. Raymond Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers. Thanks for watching, guys, and be sure to subscribe.